In 1999, a 7-year-old boy named Noah Bryant vanished from the bathroom of a public elementary school in Newark, New Jersey. One minute he was walking back from recess, the next, he was gone. No security footage, no eyewitnesses, nothing but a wet paper towel on the tiled floor. For 24 years, his mother, Renee Bryant, clung to the hope that her son might somehow still be alive. Then, last week, during a renovation of the school's basement level, a construction worker found a child's digital watch lodged inside a rusted air duct, engraved on the back, "To Noah. Love, Mom." Now, Renee sits in the police department's family liaison room, her hands trembling as Detective Carlos Medina lays the watch in front of her. The room is cold, fluorescent lights buzz softly overhead, and the walls are painted a bland, institutional beige. Renee's eyes stay fixed on the object resting on the white evidence cloth. The watch's plastic band is cracked, its screen dark and scratched. But it's his. She bought it for him on his 7th birthday. Her fingers hover just above it. Carlos Medina watches her with quiet respect. Mid-40s, calm but weathered by years of difficult cases, he doesn't speak right away. He knows the moment is too heavy for words. It was found wedged deep in an old ventilation shaft behind the south wing bathroom, he finally says. The one he was last seen entering. Renee nods, her throat tight. Did they find anything else? Carlos shakes his head. Not yet, but the entire lower level is being re-examined. We've brought in forensic anthropologists. She closes her eyes. In her mind, she sees the hallway again, sees her son walking with his head down, clutching his comic book like a shield. Noah was a quiet boy. Sensitive, the kind other kids often overlooked, or worse. Outside, thunder rolls across the city, low and distant. Rain splatters the narrow window, and Renee shivers. She's aged 20 years in spirit, even if her face refuses to show it. Holding on to hope has a cost, and hers has been exacted slowly, year after year. I need to see it again, she whispers. The bathroom, the hallway, all of it. Carlos hesitates, then nods. I'll arrange it. A silence settles. Heavy, respectful. Then Renee lifts the watch gently, cradling it like a relic. He never took it off, she says. Even in the bathtub. It beeped every hour and he'd giggle every time. Drove me nuts. Carlos smiles faintly. We've reopened the case fully, he tells her. You'll be involved every step of the way. A knock on the door interrupts them. A young officer steps in, nods at Carlos, and whispers something in his ear. Carlos listens, then turns to Renee. You remember Ms. Felicia Grant? She was the school's guidance counselor back then. Renee blinks. The name is familiar but distant. Short, dark hair? Wore scarves even in summer? Carlos nods. That's her. She's here. She just came forward with something. Said she kept it all these years but never had the courage to say anything. Renee's breath catches. Carlos stands. You ready? Renee straightens in her chair. Her voice is barely above a whisper. Yes. They walk down the quiet hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing off linoleum. Past case files line the walls, names typed in black ink under photos that long lost their color. When they reach the interview room, Felicia Grant stands behind the glass, clutching a file folder to her chest. Her eyes are wet. She's older, grayer, but something in her posture still resembles the cautious kindness Renee faintly remembers. Felicia glances up, and the moment their eyes meet, something old and buried begins to stir. Not memory, not recognition, something else, something darker, something that had been waiting 24 years to surface. October 1999. The trees outside Branch Street Elementary were beginning to turn, their leaves blushing red and orange beneath the early autumn sun. Inside the school, fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting pale light across the tiled floors and beige cinder-block walls. Posters lined the hallways. Be kind, raise your hand, always tell the truth. Faded, but still colorful. Noah Bryant stood in front of the drinking fountain, adjusting the strap of his backpack. It was just after recess. His classmates were already filing back into room 3B. But Noah lingered. His stomach ached, not from hunger, but from the slow, creeping knot of dread that returned every day after lunch. He hated that bathroom. It was cold. The door always creaked, and someone had scribbled horrible things on the inside of the stall door. Every time he went in alone, he heard whispers. Maybe not real ones, but maybe. He had told Ms. Grant about it once. She had smiled too quickly and said, "There's nothing in there but echoes, sweetheart." He hadn't believed her. Noah glanced down at his wrist. The watch glowed faintly. 12:47. He took a deep breath, then walked toward the door at the end of the hallway. The bathroom door opened slowly with that familiar groan. Cold air rushed out, and he shivered. One of the stalls was slightly ajar. The mirror above the sink was cracked in one corner, and the drain was rusted around the edges. He stepped inside. 2 minutes later, he was gone. When Ms. Alvarez took attendance at 1:05, she noticed Noah was missing. She asked a few classmates. No one had seen him after recess. One boy said he thought Noah went to the nurse. Another claimed he'd seen him near the library. By the time the main office was notified at 1:20, Noah had been missing for nearly 40 minutes. The school went into lockdown. Police arrived. Dogs were brought in. The building was searched top to bottom. No sign of him. The only thing they found was a wet paper towel in the boy's bathroom. One corner still stained with a small streak of red. No blood trail, no fingerprints, nothing conclusive. The towel was collected and logged as evidence. Later testing showed the red was dye from a felt-tip marker. For days, then weeks, the city searched. Renee Bryant stood outside the school gates every morning and every night, hoping to see a familiar face in the crowd. She begged reporters not to call her son the quiet type, not to turn him into another headline. He was more than that. He loved dinosaurs. He was afraid of bees. He once cried for an hour after stepping on a snail, and he never went anywhere without his watch. The city moved on, but she never did. At night, she sat in Noah's room, still painted with stars and planets. His favorite action figures lined the shelves. His backpack remained slumped by the door, untouched. Sometimes she turned the watch's twin, one she bought for herself, over in her hands, tracing the inscription on the back with her thumb. To Mom, love, Noah. The guilt gnawed at her. That morning they'd argued. Noah had spilled juice on her work notes, and she'd snapped. She never got to say sorry. Her marriage fell apart within a year. Friends drifted. Grief narrowed her world to a single purpose: finding her son. She started attending city council meetings, demanding the case remain active. She mailed flyers every year on Noah's birthday. She joined forums, built a website, even walked the perimeter of the school every few months, counting bricks, searching cracks. Until last week. Now, 24 years later, a cracked watch, and a school counselor with secrets might finally unravel the silence that swallowed Noah Bryant whole. The interview room smelled faintly of old coffee and lemon disinfectant. Renee stood motionless just inside the door, unsure if she was ready to face what Felicia Grant had kept hidden for more than 2 decades. Across the room, Felicia clutched a thick manila folder to her chest, her eyes rimmed red, her mouth trembling like someone trying to hold in a storm. Detective Carlos Medina motioned toward the chair beside her. "You're not under arrest, Ms. Grant, but I need you to be clear, truthful, and complete. You said you had something to share about Noah Bryant's disappearance. Now's the time." Felicia sat down slowly. Her hands fumbled with the folder's flap. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. "I was just trying to protect him." Renee stiffened. "Protect him from what?" Felicia's gaze met hers, and for a moment Renee saw something familiar in her eyes. Guilt. Real, suffocating. "Guilt? There were signs," Felicia said. "Little things, bruises on his arms, nightmares. He started drawing strange pictures. Dark figures, tunnels, eyes watching him. I reported it, twice. Once to the principal, once to Child Protective Services. And," Carlos pressed. Felicia shook her head. "Both times I was told to drop it, that I was overstepping. The principal, Mr. Dunley, he told me the boy was imaginative, sensitive, that I was projecting." She finally opened the folder. Inside were photocopies of drawings, each one more disturbing than the last. Noah's name was scribbled in the corners. One showed a stick figure inside a dark room with no windows. Another had a face, long, stretched, mouth wide open, hovering near a school hallway. Renee reached out and touched one of the pages. Her breath caught. He drew this the week before he vanished. I remember. He said it was a bad dream that lived near the sinks. Carlos leaned forward. Why didn't you say anything sooner, Miss Grant? Felicia's voice cracked. Because I was afraid, not of losing my job. Of him. Dunley. There was something wrong about the way he dismissed things. Like he already knew. Like it wasn't the first time. The room went silent. Carlos tapped the table twice. Where is Mr. Dunley now? Felicia swallowed hard. He retired. In 2003. Moved to Maine, I think. I don't know the address, but I heard he kept some old school files in his garage. Files he wasn't supposed to take. Renee stood slowly. Her voice was low, shaking. Then that's where we go next. Felicia didn't stop her. She just sat there, hollow-eyed, as if she'd been carrying a secret coffin for 24 years, and had finally set it down. Outside the room, the rain had stopped, but a cold wind stirred the puddles along the sidewalk. Something long buried had just begun to surface, and the ground, still soft from the storm, was ready to be broken open. Carlos walked Renee to the lobby, both moving in silence. The late afternoon sun broke through the clouds, casting long stripes of light across the linoleum floor. Carlos paused by the glass doors, pulling out his phone. I'm going to put out a locate and contact on Dunley, he said. But if he's really in Maine, it'll take a few days to get jurisdictional cooperation. Renee crossed her arms, still holding the photocopied drawings against her chest. I'm not waiting days, detective. If you give me the last known address, I'll go. Myself. Carlos gave her a look, part frustration, part admiration. You're relentless. You don't wait 24 years for answers and then stop now, she said quietly. He sighed. I'll pull his personnel file, see if there's anything useful. While Carlos headed back to his office, Renee stepped outside. The air was cool and sharp. Across the street, she noticed a man standing near a payphone, watching her. Mid-50s, thick gray hair, wearing a dark green jacket. The moment their eyes met, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the side alley. Her pulse quickened. Was it paranoia? Or something more? Back inside, Carlos returned, waving a sheet of paper. Got it. Last known address in Rockland, Maine. Coastal town. About 6 hours by car. Renee grabbed her keys from her purse. Then I'm leaving now. Carlos hesitated. At least wait for me to contact local law enforcement. Let them know you're coming. She nodded reluctantly. But I'm still going. As she turned toward the exit, Felicia appeared in the hallway doorway. Renee, she called softly. Renee paused, glancing back. Felicia's eyes were glassy. Be careful. There's more to this than you think. Renee swallowed hard, then pushed through the doors and stepped into the cool Newark evening. The distant sound of sirens rose in the air, mingling with the faint metallic taste of city rain still lingering on the pavement. With every mile she would drive north, the past was coming closer, and whatever waited for her in Maine, it had been waiting a long, long time. The highway stretched endlessly before her, a ribbon of cracked asphalt threading through dense pine forests and fog-laced valleys. Renee gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles pale against the worn leather. The rhythmic slap of windshield wipers fought against a light drizzle, and the dim glow of the dashboard clock marked each passing hour with quiet insistence. It was just after 2 a.m. when she crossed the state line into Maine. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but her mind refused to rest. The images haunted her. Noah's drawings, Felicia's trembling hands, the shadowed figure watching her near the police station. Every mile she drove felt like peeling back a layer of her own restraint, exposing raw nerves she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. By 3:30 a.m., she reached Rockland, a sleepy coastal town, its streets lined with colonial houses and shuttered shops. The air smelled of salt and damp earth. Streetlights cast dim yellow cones onto the slick pavement as she navigated toward the address Carlos had given her. The house sat at the end of a gravel driveway, half hidden by overgrown pines. 2 stories, faded white paint, and sagging gutters. A detached garage stood beside it, its door sealed with a rusted padlock. Even in the dark, the place radiated neglect. Renee parked down the block, killed the engine, and sat in silence for a long moment. The ticking of the cooling engine sounded deafening. Her heart thudded in her chest, slow and heavy. She pulled out her phone and sent a quick text to Carlos. "I'm here. Waiting. We'll update soon." Sliding her keys into her pocket, she stepped out into the cold night air. The gravel crunched under her shoes as she approached the house. Lights were off, curtains drawn, no sign of movement. For a moment she questioned herself. What exactly was she going to do? Knock on the door and demand answers from a man she hadn't seen in over 2 decades? Before she could decide, a flicker of light caught her eye. From the side window of the garage, a small beam like a flashlight. Her breath hitched. Someone was inside. Moving quickly but quietly, she crossed the yard and pressed her ear against the garage wall. The muffled scrape of metal echoed inside, followed by what sounded like papers, shifting. Then a cough. A man's voice, low and rough from age or sleep. Heart pounding, she pulled out her phone again, her fingers trembling as she dialed Carlos. Straight to voicemail. No signal. She crouched low, inching around the back of the garage, where a narrow side door stood slightly ajar. The hinges creaked faintly as she pushed it open just enough to peer inside. Stacks of old file boxes lined the room. Metal cabinets stood against the far wall. A single hanging bulb illuminated a hunched figure rifling through a crate of folders. His back was to her, but even after all these years, she recognized the slope of his shoulders, the stoop in his frame. Arthur Dunley. Renee's breath caught in her throat. Her instinct was to shout, to demand answers, but she stayed quiet, crouching, lower behind a stack of rusted gardening tools. Dunley muttered something under his breath as he pulled out a folder and opened it. Even from her hiding place, Renee caught a glimpse of what was inside. Rows of black and white photos. Children. School portraits. Some faces she recognized from Noah's yearbook. Her stomach twisted. Dunley stuffed the folder into a battered duffel bag at his feet, along with several others. Then he moved to the far wall and began unlocking a metal filing cabinet with a small key around his neck. Renee's pulse roared in her ears. She had to act. Now. But before she could move, a shadow fell across the garage floor behind her. A second figure. Someone else was here. The last thing Renee saw before everything went black was the glint of metal swinging toward her head. When Renee came to, everything felt muffled. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine, and her vision swam in and out of focus. Cold concrete pressed against her cheek. The copper taste of blood coated her mouth. Slowly she opened her eyes and tried to push herself up, but her arms refused to cooperate. Her head throbbed in pulses, each beat sending sharp pain across her skull. The garage was darker now. The single bulb had been switched off, and the only light filtered in faintly from a small, grimy window near the ceiling. She blinked, trying to orient herself. Something tight dug into her wrists. Zip ties. Her hands were bound behind her back. Panic surged. She struggled to sit up, twisting her body until she was propped against the wall. Her breathing came fast and shallow. Somewhere nearby, she heard movement. Papers rustling, a drawer slamming shut. Then a voice. "Not Dunley. You should have stayed in Newark," the man muttered. The tone was gravelly, unfamiliar. Whoever he was, he sounded older but stronger. "Then Dunley." Renee's heart pounded as she strained to listen. Footsteps approached. A flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, landing directly on her face. She squinted and turned her head away, but the man stepped closer, crouching in front of her. Medium build, salt and pepper beard, deep lines carved around his eyes like someone used to squinting in bright sun. A long scar cut across his temple and disappeared into his hairline. "You made a mistake coming here," he said, voice low. Who are you?" Renee croaked. He smiled faintly, but there was no kindness in it. "Doesn't matter." Behind him, Renee caught a glimpse of Dunley pacing near the cabinets, wringing his hands, sweat soaking through his shirt. "I told you," Dunley said, his voice shaking. "I told you this would happen. She came looking." "And you didn't stop her," the man growled. "Now we've got a bigger mess." Renee's mind raced. She focused on her breathing, fighting off the rising panic. "If you let me go now, she said slowly. "I won't press charges. Just let me leave." The man let out a short, bitter laugh. "That's not how this works." He stood and turned toward Dunley. "Get the rest of it packed. We're leaving tonight." "But there's too much," Dunley stammered. "The files, the photos, the—" "Burn what you can't carry," the man snapped. "And finish with her." Renee's breath caught. "Finish?" she whispered. The man didn't answer. He disappeared into the shadows at the far end of the garage, leaving Dunley frozen in place, staring at her like a trapped animal. For a long moment neither of them moved. Then Dunley stepped forward, holding something heavy in his shaking hands, a tire iron. Renee's survival instinct kicked in. Her legs, though weak, pushed hard against the floor, sliding her body toward the nearest stack of boxes. She twisted her wrists violently, scraping the zip ties against a jagged piece of metal protruding from the wall. "Don't!" Dunley shouted, stepping closer, raising the iron. In one desperate motion, Renee pulled her knees to her chest and kicked out with everything she had. The blow connected with Dunley's knee, sending him sprawling backward with a pained yell. The iron clattered to the floor. With shaking fingers, Renee worked the zip tie against the metal edge until it finally snapped. Her wrists burned with fresh cuts, but she didn't stop. She grabbed the tire iron, staggering to her feet. Dunley scrambled backward across the floor. "Wait, I didn't want this. It wasn't my choice." "Where's my son?" Renee screamed, her voice raw. Before he could answer, the garage door suddenly burst open. Flashlights flooded the room. Shouts rang out. "Police! Drop your weapon!" "Carlos!" He charged in, weapon drawn, followed by two uniformed officers. Renee froze, letting the iron slip from her hands as Carlos rushed to her side. "We got you," he said, steadying her. "You're safe now." Renee collapsed against him, the room spinning as her adrenaline finally broke. But even as the officers cuffed Dunley and began clearing the garage, one question burned through the fog of her mind. Where was the other man? Because whoever he was gone. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over Rockland when Renee sat on the back bumper of an ambulance, a thin gray blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Her skin was clammy, and her wrists throbbed beneath the fresh gauze the EMTs had applied. The air smelled like damp leaves and smoke, the faint residue from whatever Dunley had started burning before the police arrived. Detective Carlos Medina stood a few feet away, talking in low tones with a uniformed officer. He held a notepad, scribbling furiously between glances at the garage. Crime scene tape fluttered in the breeze. When he finally approached her, his face was drawn, eyes tired but focused. "We've recovered most of the files," he said, crouching, to meet her gaze. "Whatever they didn't get a chance to burn. It's a lot. Decades worth of records. Not just on Noah. Other kids, too. Missing, transferred, some expelled under strange circumstances." Renee's stomach twisted. "How many?" Carlos sighed. "Too many to count this early. We'll need time to process it all. But your son's name appears more than once. There are notes about his behavior, counselor meetings, incident reports, and something else." He handed her a plastic evidence bag. Inside was a small worn notebook, spiral-bound, its cover stained and cracked. Renee's hands trembled as she opened it. The first page was filled with dates, scribbled notes, and student names. Her heart stopped when she reached an entry marked October 12, 1999. Noah Bryant. Referred to Room 204, 12:50 p.m. Her breath caught in her throat. "Room 204? What is that?" Carlos shook his head. "That's the thing. There was no Room 204. At Branch Street Elementary, the school floor plans only went up to 203. I double-checked." Renee stared at him, her mind spinning. "Then where did he go?" Carlos flipped a few pages back in the notebook and pointed. "See this? There's another entry. Same room number, same handwriting, but a different student. Anthony Sloan. Missing. Since 1994. Her blood ran cold. Before she could respond, one of the officers approached, holding a clear evidence bag. Inside was an old brass key, tarnished with age. A faded tag dangled from it, the ink barely legible. Carlos squinted at the writing. "Looks like it says, boiler access, south wing." Renee's eyes widened. "That's near the bathroom where Noah disappeared." Carlos nodded. "We're getting a search warrant for the school now. I'm heading back." Without hesitation, Renee stood. "I'm coming with you." Carlos started to object but stopped himself. "You sure?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. By the time they reached Branch Street Elementary that afternoon, the school was already cordoned off. Yellow tape stretched across the front entrance, and news vans parked along the sidewalk. Curious neighbors gathered in small clusters, whispering and pointing as officers moved in and out of the building. Inside, the air felt stale. Dust motes floated in the beams of sunlight that cut through the narrow windows. The school had been partially renovated over the years, but certain corners, especially the basement and maintenance areas, remained untouched relics of the past. Carlos led the way, flashlight in hand, down a narrow staircase that descended toward the boiler room. Renee followed closely, the brass key clenched tightly in her fist. The air grew colder as they reached the bottom landing. The walls were lined with cracked pipes and peeling paint. A heavy steel door stood at the end of the corridor, its surface rusted, its lock old and discolored. Carlos inserted the key, turning it slowly. The mechanism groaned, then clicked open. As the door swung wide, a rush of cold, stagnant air spilled out. Renee stepped forward, squinting into the darkness beyond. What she saw made her blood freeze. The narrow space beyond was lined with shelves. On each shelf, neatly arranged in rows, sat small, dusty personal items. Lunchboxes, shoes, pencil, cases, and watches. Dozens of them. And in the center of the floor, a single, child-sized backpack, faded blue with a dinosaur patch sewn onto the front pocket. Noah's backpack. Renee dropped to her knees, her fingers trembling as she reached for the faded blue backpack. The dinosaur patch was frayed at the edges, but unmistakable. Her breath came in short, uneven bursts as she held it close to her chest, eyes closing against the flood of memories. Carlos placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "Take your time," he said quietly. She nodded, but time felt irrelevant now. All that mattered was the cold, undeniable truth in front of her. Carlos motioned for the forensic team to enter. They began photographing the shelves, carefully cataloging every item. Plastic evidence bags filled quickly with shoes, small sweaters, lunch boxes, all belonging to children who had disappeared over the past 3 decades. As Renee stood, wiping tears from her face, Carlos opened another cabinet against the far wall. Inside were more folders, attendance records, behavioral reports, even counselor notes, some written in Felicia Grant's unmistakable handwriting. But others had been written by someone else. "Dunley," Carlos muttered under his breath. "He documented everything, kept records on each kid, who they talked to, when they went missing." Renee's eyes fell on one particular folder labeled Noah Bryant, Restricted. She grabbed it, flipping through its contents. Pages of psychological assessments, strange notations, and clipped newspaper articles about other missing children. One report stood out, a single sentence, written in shaky ink. "Transferred to Program Overseer, October 12, 1999. "Program Overseer?" she whispered. Carlos shook his head. "I've never heard of that." Before they could say more, one of the forensic techs called out from the corner of the room. "Detective Medina, you're going to want to see this." Carlos crossed the room. Renee followed. Behind a false panel near the floor, hidden behind loose bricks, the tech had uncovered a narrow tunnel entrance. The opening was barely large enough for an adult to crawl through. Cold air flowed from within, carrying the faint smell of damp soil and mold. Renee's heart raced. "Where does it lead?" "We don't know," the tech replied. "It slopes down and curves out of sight. Could connect to the old utility tunnels under the neighborhood." Carlos turned to Renee. "We'll send in the search team first. It could be unstable. Down there." But Renee had already stepped toward the opening, crouching low, her flashlight trembling in her grip. "I'm going," she said. "I've waited long enough." Before Carlos could argue, she disappeared into the tunnel. The space was tight, forcing her onto hands and knees. The air grew colder with each foot she crawled. Her flashlight beam danced wildly across dirt walls, revealing roots snaking through the soil like thin fingers. The air grew denser, thick with the scent of wet earth and old stone. Her breaths came faster, fogging the light in front of her. Panic clawed at the edges of her mind, but she forced herself to keep moving. After what felt like endless minutes, the tunnel opened into a small, hidden chamber. At the center stood an old wooden door, bolted, padlocked. Heavy scratch marks lined its surface, as if someone or something had once tried to claw their way out. Renee's breath caught in her throat. Her fingers hovered near the lock. Footsteps echoed behind her. Carlos appeared at the tunnel mouth, breathing hard from the crawl. "We've got bolt cutters," he said, holding them up. Together they clipped the lock free. With a final trembling push, Renee opened the door, and what lay beyond was a darkness so complete, so heavy, it seemed to swallow the light whole. Somewhere, inside, something moved. A soft scraping sound echoed from deep within. The beam from Carlos's flashlight caught glimpses of rusted metal bars and what looked like a collapsed storage room far below floor level. The space opened into a pit, about 10 feet down, with remnants of old mattresses, torn blankets, and empty food cans scattered across the dirt floor. Renee's heart stopped when she noticed handprints, small, faded prints smeared along the wall as if dozens of little hands had once pressed desperately against it. Carlos pulled out his radio. "We're going to need backup and hazmat. We've just opened something big down here." Renee, still frozen at the threshold, whispered almost to herself, "How many kids? How many were down here?" Carlos squeezed her shoulder again. "Let's find out." Behind them, more flashlights appeared as the search team began entering the tunnel. The darkness ahead waited, patient and deep, holding its secrets just out of reach. The following hours blurred into a haze of flashing lights, shouted instructions, and the steady hum of portable generators echoing off the concrete walls of the school basement. Crime scene investigators in white Tyvek suits moved in and out of the tunnel like ghosts, their gloves dusted with dirt and debris. Renee stood near the tunnel entrance, watching the flow of people with numb disbelief. A makeshift command post had been set up inside the old gymnasium upstairs. Folding tables held laptops, evidence trays, and dozens of labeled evidence bags. The air smelled of coffee, damp stone, and latex gloves. Carlos approached, holding a clipboard thick with initial reports. His face was pale, jaw tight. "They've finished the preliminary search," he said. "So far, no bodies, but there are signs that children were kept down there. Old food wrappers, torn clothing, toys, and those handprints, they're all over the walls. Different sizes, different ages." Renee's stomach twisted. "But no remains?" Carlos shook his head. "Not yet. There are sealed access points deeper underground. Older tunnels from before the school was renovated in the 70s. Some of them were blocked off with concrete. We're bringing in structural engineers to help open them safely." As he spoke, one of the forensic techs approached, holding a small, dirt-streaked object wrapped in plastic. "This was found wedged in the dirt near the far wall," she said. Renee's heart skipped a beat. The tech unwrapped the plastic carefully, revealing a small plastic dinosaur figurine, green with faded yellow stripes. Its tail was cracked, the paint chipped, but Renee recognized it instantly. "This was his," she whispered, reaching out to touch the plastic barrier as tears welled in her eyes. "It was in his backpack the day he disappeared." Carlos lowered his voice. "There's more. Some of the files we recovered from Dunley's house reference a man only identified as the overseer. No full name, no address, but always tied to room 204. Renee frowned. "That second man in the garage, he's still out there?" Carlos nodded. "We're working with federal agencies now, tracking any property, land deeds, or institutional ties that might connect Dunley or this overseer to facilities in the area." Renee looked toward the tunnel entrance again, her fists clenching. "He's still hiding, but we're closer now." Carlos placed a reassuring hand on her back. "Closer than we've been in 24 years. From somewhere deep inside the tunnel, the faint echo of jackhammers started up as crews began breaking through the old concrete walls. The ground trembled faintly beneath their feet, and somewhere, beyond the layers of earth and time, the truth waited to be unearthed. As the day wore on, the media caught wind of the operation. News vans began arriving, reporters setting up cameras across the school's front lawn. By late afternoon, aerial shots from local helicopters were already circulating. On social media, the words, "Breaking Newark Cold Case Reopened," flashed across television screens citywide. Inside the gymnasium, Carlos worked closely with a growing team of specialists, forensic anthropologists, child psychologists, even 2 agents from the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit, who had flown in that morning. Maps of the underground tunnel system covered the tables. Red circles marked points of interest, while blue pins indicated blocked passages still awaiting excavation. Renee barely noticed the chaos around her. She sat at one corner of the gym, staring at the recovered dinosaur figurine now sealed inside, an evidence container. Her phone buzzed in her jacket pocket. A text from Felicia Grant. "I'm watching the news. If you need me, I'm here." For the first time in days, Renee allowed herself a small, shaky breath of gratitude. Carlos approached again, this time holding a folder marked "Recovered Evidence, Priority." He flipped it open, revealing grainy, black and white surveillance stills taken from the school archives. One image made Renee freeze. A man, partially obscured, leading a small figure down a hallway. The timestamp, October 12, 1999. 12:52 p.m. The figure being led was Noah. The photo sat heavy in Renee's lap, her eyes fixed on the grainy silhouette of the man leading Noah down the hallway. The image was blurry, the man's face turned just enough to obscure any identifying features, but something about the way he held Noah's wrist, firm, controlling, made Renee's stomach churn. "We've enhanced the image as much as we can," Carlos said, standing beside her. "No facial recognition hits. His profile doesn't match Dunley, but we're running it through national missing persons and offender databases." Renee barely heard him. Her mind spiraled backward, replaying every day leading up to Noah's disappearance. Every morning drop-off, every parent-teacher meeting, every lingering glance from strangers in the school corridors. Could she have missed this man back then? Had he been there all along, hiding in plain sight? Across the gymnasium, one of the FBI agents waved Carlos over. They spoke briefly. Then Carlos returned, face more serious than before. "You need to see this," he said. He led her to a portable monitor where one of the agents pulled up a scanned document recently recovered from Dunley's garage. It was a faded internal memo from 1998, issued by the Newark Board of Education. The heading read, "Special Access Authorization, South Wing Storage and Maintenance Tunnels." Beneath that, a list of authorized personnel. 2 names, Arthur Dunley and Leonard Voss. Renee frowned. "Who's Leonard Voss?" Carlos exhaled slowly. "Former district maintenance supervisor, retired in 2000. No known address on file since then." Renee's heart skipped. Could that be him? The man in the photo? "Possible," Carlos said. "We're digging deeper." One of the agents added, "Voss also worked on several older schools in the district. Most of them had similar basement layouts and tunnel systems." Renee's pulse quickened. "You're saying this could have happened elsewhere?" Carlos nodded grimly. "We're not ruling it out." Before she could respond, another forensic tech rushed in from the tunnel entrance. "Detective, we broke through the first concrete barrier. There's another chamber beyond it, and there's something inside." Without hesitation, Renee and Carlos followed the team down the stairwell and through the tunnel. The air grew colder, the walls narrower. When they reached the breach, powerful work lights illuminated the newly exposed space. Inside, the walls were covered in chalk drawings, childlike scrawls of faces, doors, stairways, and eyes. Always eyes. In the center of the chamber sat an old metal chair, bolted to the floor. Its seat, stained dark, with something that made Renee's knees go weak. Carlos caught her before she fell. "Stay back," he said, his voice tight, but even from the threshold Renee knew. This room had been used for something, and it wasn't just storage. A second forensic tech stepped forward, shining a UV light across the stained seat and nearby floor. Under the purple glow, faint splatter patterns became visible, radiating outward from the chair like some terrible sunburst. "We'll run full luminol tests," the tech said, voice low. "But it looks like blood. Old. Years old." Renee covered her. mouth, her stomach threatening to revolt. Carlos guided her back a few steps, but her eyes remained fixed on the chair. In one corner of the room, another officer examined a large wooden crate. After prying it open, he pulled out several items wrapped in decayed fabric: children's shoes, small jackets, even a faded lunchbox with cartoon characters still barely visible. Renee recognized the design immediately. "That's from the 90s, she whispered, pointing. "That exact model. I bought one like it for Noah's friend Tyler." Carlos's expression darkened. "We'll cross-check all missing persons from the district archives." Suddenly, a radio crackled. "To life on one of the officers' belts. Detective Medina, this is Agent Wilkes upstairs. We've got a hit. An address for Leonard Voss. It's a cabin property just outside of Trenton." Carlos grabbed the radio. "Send the team. Secure the perimeter. Nobody goes in until I get there." Renee's heart slammed against her ribs. "I'm going with you." Carlos looked at her for a long moment, weighing everything. "Then let's move," he said. Together they turned away from the dark chamber, leaving the room behind, but carrying its weight with them as they headed back toward the surface and whatever waited at Leonard Voss's cabin. The drive to Trenton felt endless. The landscape blurred past the car windows: rolling fields, abandoned service stations, rusted billboards for roadside diners long closed. The late afternoon sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the highway. Renee sat in the passenger seat beside Carlos, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her bag. Carlos kept his eyes on the road, occasionally glancing at the GPS mounted on the dashboard. "We're about 20 minutes out," he said. "The property sits at the end of a private dirt road. It's remote, no close neighbors." Renee swallowed hard. "Sounds about right for a man like Voss." The closer they got, the thicker the trees grew. The paved highway narrowed into cracked asphalt, then into a winding dirt track flanked by dense pines. When Carlos finally killed the engine, they sat in silence for a moment, staring at the small, sagging cabin ahead. Its windows were covered with plywood. The roof sagged in the middle, and rusted garden tools leaned against the porch rail. An old van, faded blue with peeling paint, sat parked near the tree line. Carlos nodded to the officers in the SUV behind them. "We approach slow. No hero moves. Guns drawn." The team moved in formation toward the front door. Renee stayed close behind Carlos, adrenaline making her chest tighten with every step. Carlos knocked hard. "Leonard Voss, this is the police. Come out with your hands where we can see them." No response. A second knock. Then Carlos motioned for the battering ram. The door burst open with a deafening crack. Inside, the air smelled of mildew, old wood, and something else. Something metallic and stale. Dust swirled under the sudden rush of light. The living room was a mess. Stacks of newspapers, empty food containers, and rows of VHS tapes lined the shelves. A small black-and-white television flickered with static in the corner, though it hadn't been plugged in for years. Renee's eyes darted to a wall covered with pinned photographs. Children, dozens of them. School portraits, yearbook pages, even candid playground shots. "Jesus," one of the officers muttered. Carlos moved toward a door at the back of the room, signaling for two officers to cover him. He turned the knob. Locked. With a nod, one of the officers kicked it open. The smell hit them first. A windowless room, low ceiling. The floor covered in matted blankets and stained mattresses. Metal rings were bolted to the walls near the floor. Restraints. Renee's stomach lurched. On a battered table in the corner, more files lay scattered. Carlos pulled on gloves and flipped through them. Attendance logs, behavior notes. This guy tracked everything. Renee spotted something sticking out from beneath a stack of folders. She reached for it, her hands trembling. A faded Polaroid. Noah, her son, sitting cross-legged on a bare floor looking directly at the camera. Behind him, the same scratched wooden walls as this room. Her breath hitched. "He was here," she whispered, her voice breaking. "My baby was here." Carlos placed a hand on her back. "We'll find him, Renee. We're closer than ever." Another officer appeared in the doorway, holding up a cracked cell phone wrapped in evidence tape. "We found this hidden under the floorboards, in the bedroom. Looks like Voss's. Battery's dead, but we'll have IT look at it." Carlos's radio crackled. "Detective Medina, you need to see the basement. Now." They moved quickly. The basement stairs creaked under their weight. The air grew colder, heavier. At the bottom, a metal door stood half open. Inside was a makeshift darkroom. Chemical trays, red lights, a wall lined with developing photos hung from clips, photos of children, and in the center, a larger print still drying. It showed the tunnel underneath Branch Street Elementary, the same section they'd only just uncovered days ago. Carlos's voice dropped to a near whisper. He's been watching the investigation. Renee stepped closer, her chest tightening as realization hit her. "He's one step ahead of us," she said, her voice shaking. And somewhere out there, Leonard Voss was still moving. The following morning, the police command center buzzed with controlled chaos. Maps were pinned to corkboards. Timelines were scribbled across whiteboards. Officers, analysts, and FBI agents moved through the gymnasium, their voices low but urgent. Renee stood near a coffee station, gripping a paper cup she hadn't touched. The Polaroid of Noah sat in a clear evidence sleeve on the table nearby. She couldn't stop looking at it. Carlos approached, a grin set to his jaw. "We pulled data from Voss's phone overnight," he said. "Most of it's corrupted or wiped, but our IT team recovered fragments, GPS pings, text drafts. One incoming number shows up repeatedly over the past 6 months." "Whose number?" Renee asked, her voice raw. Carlos handed her a printout. "No registered name, but we traced the tower locations. Every call was made from within Newark city limits." Renee frowned. "He's been in Newark this whole time? Or at least someone working with him has," Carlos said. "And there's more." The last outgoing text from Voss's phone was time-stamped 2 hours before we raided the cabin. It reads, "They're coming. Go dark. 204 stays closed." Renee's stomach tightened. 204 again. Carlos nodded. "Whoever received that message hasn't used the phone since. No calls, no texts, no data. They went completely silent." At that moment, an officer approached holding a laptop. "Detective Medina, you need to see this. Surveillance footage from 2 nights ago. Gas station near Branch Street Elementary." Carlos and Renee followed him to the monitor. The grainy footage showed a tall man with a gray beard and a dark jacket filling a gas can. His face was mostly hidden beneath a hood. But when he glanced toward the camera, Renee gasped. "That's him," she whispered. "That's the man from the garage. The one who attacked me." Carlos leaned in, studying the footage. "And he was less than 2 miles from the school, just 48 hours ago," the officer fast-forwarded. The man paid in cash, then left on foot, disappearing toward an industrial district. Carlos stood straight, issuing orders. "Lock down that area. Every vacant building, every alley, every warehouse gets searched. No exceptions." As teams mobilized, Renee felt a strange clarity settle over her. The fear that had haunted her for decades was still there, but now it burned with purpose. 2 hours later, she rode with Carlos in an unmarked car, driving slowly through the old warehouse district. The streets felt empty, almost abandoned. But behind cracked windows and rusted loading docks, eyes could be watching. Carlos's radio crackled. "Unit 6 to command. We found fresh footprints behind an abandoned textile mill. Possible signs of recent occupancy." Carlos looked at Renee. "Hang on." They sped toward the location. When they arrived, officers had already surrounded the building. Dogs barked near the entrance, handlers struggling to hold them back. Carlos motioned for Renee to stay behind. "I need you safe." But Renee followed close, her heart pounding with every step. Inside the building, dust hung thick in the air. Footprints trailed across the floor, leading toward a back stairwell that descended into darkness. Carlos drew his weapon. Officers flanked him as they moved down the steps. At the bottom, a single metal door. Unlocked. Carlos gave the signal. The team burst through. What they found inside made everyone freeze. Cots, shelves stocked with canned food, a radio transmitter, still warm to the touch, maps pinned to the walls, school floor plans, city sewer systems, escape routes, and in the center of the room, a corkboard covered in photographs. Not just children. Photos of Renee, her house, her car, her walking routes, even pictures from days earlier, her talking with Carlos, standing outside the police station, exiting the school. She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. "He's been watching me this whole time." Carlos turned to his team. "We're dealing with a predator who plans his moves weeks in advance. This isn't over. Not yet." Behind them, one of the K-9 units started barking wildly at a floor grate near the far corner of the room. The sound reverberated off the concrete walls. Carlos exchanged a tense glance with Renee. "Get that grate open, now!" As officers began prying. "It loose?" Renee braced herself. The next few minutes could finally bring her closer to Noah, or reveal something far worse. The grate came free with a screech of rusted metal, the noise echoing through the concrete chamber like a scream. A rush of stale, cold air poured out from the dark hole beneath. The scent was metallic, damp, and unmistakably old. Carlos pulled a flashlight from his belt and aimed the beam downward. A narrow vertical shaft stretched at least 10 feet deep, with an old iron ladder bolted into the wall. At the bottom, the tunnel branched off in both directions, left and right, disappearing into blackness. "We go in slow," Carlos said, signaling 2 officers to descend first. "Gas sensors on. Flashlights only. No radios past the entrance. We don't want to trigger any old wiring or motion sensors." Renee stood at the edge, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. Carlos turned to her. "You stay here until we clear the first 100 feet. Then I'll come back for you." "No," she said, her voice steady. "I'm going with you now." Carlos hesitated but saw the resolve in her eyes. "Stay close. No sudden moves." Together they climbed down, boots scraping against cold iron. The air thickened as they descended. At the bottom, their flashlights revealed walls lined with aged bricks, roots protruding through the mortar like veins. They moved slowly, first down the left corridor. Old electrical cables snaked along the ceiling. Broken wooden doors led into tiny cells, each no larger than a closet. Rusted hinges, moldy bedding, scratches etched deep into the walls. Carlos scanned the area. "Looks like it's been abandoned for years." But when they reached the next junction, a faint noise stopped them cold. A cough, barely audible, weak, human. Renee's breath hitched. "Did you hear that?" Carlos nodded, raising his flashlight, sweeping it toward the right-hand tunnel. The team moved quickly but carefully, stepping over debris, ducking under low beams. The air grew colder. Renee's flashlight flickered but stabilized again. As they turned the corner, they found another door, this one newer, reinforced steel, recently installed. Carlos tested the handle. "Locked from the outside. Battering ram," he ordered. Within moments, 2 officers rammed the door open with a thunderous crack. What lay beyond made Renee collapse to her knees. A small, dimly lit room, and inside, curled in the corner under a thin blanket, was a young man, gaunt, filthy, barely conscious, his face half hidden by overgrown hair and beard. But when he lifted his head and blinked at the sudden light, Renee knew. It was Noah, older, scarred, broken, but alive. "Oh my God!" she sobbed, scrambling toward him. "Noah, baby, it's me. It's Mom." Noah flinched at first, disoriented, shielding his eyes. But as her voice broke through the fog, recognition flickered across his hollow gaze. His lips, parted, dry, and cracked. "Mom?" he croaked, the word barely more than air. Carlos dropped to one knee beside them, radioing for medics. "We've got him. Subject located. Alive. Repeat, alive. Request immediate medical extraction." The team moved swiftly. Blankets, oxygen, IVs. They carried Noah out carefully, shielding him from the harsh lights and noise above ground. As the paramedics loaded him into the waiting ambulance, Renee climbed inside with him, never letting go of his hand. Through tears, she pressed her forehead to his. "You're safe now. You're coming home." As the sirens wailed and the ambulance sped toward the hospital, Carlos stood at the tunnel entrance, staring back at the dark hole they had pulled Noah from. One man was still missing, Leonard Voss. But for now, one mother had her son back, and that was enough for today.